So I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to this presentation on the Early Years Toolbox. My name is Cathrine Neilsen-Hewett and I'm the Director of the Early Years here at the University of Wollongong. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands at which we meet today. So I'm here at the University of Wollongong, which is Dharawal land, so I'd like to pay my respects to the Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation and extend those respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing connection to culture, land and waters. So before I begin, I'd also like to introduce you to the Early Years Toolbox team. So we have Professor Edward Mellish from Oxford, along with myself, Stephen Howard and Mark Derone, who are all from the University of Wollongong. Now, the Early Years Toolbox work that I'm going to be sharing with you today really reflects a strong commitment to the translation of educationally meaningful and impactful research. And it reflects a dual commitment to the development of measurement tools that really hold an equal significance to both researchers and educators, and more importantly, are really designed to allow educators and researchers to connect through the use of really meaningful and translatable and importantly actionable data on children. Now, the environment of the early years is a demanding one, and it's one in which educators really endeavour to understand children as active learners and to respond to their needs and abilities across a range of very important domains. And this is really captured here in the figure. So educators primarily understand children through their relationships with them and through their observations, which in turn informs their practices. Now, this approach is fundamental to high quality practice, but it's not inherently suited to differentiating children in ways that allow individualised responses across a range of curriculum and developmental domains. So the Early Years Toolbox is really a response to that need, and it was developed with and for educators to really support their practices by putting decades of research into really easily accessible tools that cover really important domains of children's development. Now, significantly, elements of the toolbox are really organised under a common approach, which really recognises the importance of educators and their ability to be responsive and also their ability to tailor their pedagogy intentionally to children's individual needs. So the tools are really designed to be engaging and low impact for children. So they're assessments that don't look like assessment, and they're also designed to be practical and to be able to be used by educators within those normal programming and planning cycles. And if assessments are to be educationally impactful, then they need to really yield meaningful and actionable data, and it needs to be developmentally sensitive. And ultimately, when we've really been designing these measures, they're really designed to support practice. And that is done through really embedding these tools within the provision of professional learning and evidence translation. And as well as being effective for practice, we also wanted to make sure that these tools were suitable for monitoring development so that they would articulate into learning progressions right up until the primary years. But we also saw the value of ensuring that they also support first steps to high stakes decision making. So children who are experiencing difficulties in different areas of their development, we could respond to them much earlier in terms of their developmental trajectory. Now, the tool itself has been used extensively, and both in terms of educational context, but also research context. So it's been used across a number of countries, and it's also been translated into a number of languages in terms of supporting children. Now, for today's presentation, I want to just focus on one measure within the toolbox, and the tool that I'm going to focus on is known as PRSIST, and this is really designed to assess children's self-regulation. Now, I want to take you for a moment into an early years environment, and this could be anywhere or almost anywhere in Australia. Now, the educator is working with a small group of children and she's playing a memory game. Now, we could focus on any of these children, and in fact, as educators, we'd focus on each of them. But today I want you to hone in on Kai and Scarlett. Now, both of these children are just about to turn 4 years of age. And the video that I'm about to show you captures a play-based observational component of our self-regulatory assessment known as PRSIST. Now, as you watch the video, I want you to try and notice aspects of their behaviour which might be meaningful. So I want you to take a look at Kai, who's on the left there. I want you to look at his sustained attention. I would like you to think about his fidgeting, his self-directedness, but also his frustration response.
So
So the person sitting next to me goes first on that side. So who's that? Goes Kai. Then Lewis, you're next. And then after Lewis's turn, it's Burton's turn. And after Burton's turn, it's the beautiful Scarlett. And then when you're finished your turn, I'm not going to play. I'm just going to watch and see how clever you are. So then we go all the way back to Kai again. Okay. Is everybody ready? Yeah! Have we got our thinking caps on? Have we got our concentration eyes? Are we ready to look? Are we ready to remember? And are we ready to take turns? Okay. Let's go. And I'll tell you once I put them all out. Everyone can reach. This is a little bit exciting. Okay. It is hard, isn't it? It's a little bit tricky because you can't see it. No. So you've got to try and remember. So first turn, and it doesn't matter if they're not the same. You turn them back over, and then the next person has a go. Yeah. All right, you ready, Kai? You see if you can find two that are the same. And you can only turn two over. You're still going to wait because it's not your turn. I know, but you didn't turn that over. You just moved around a little bit. There we go. Turn them back. All right, Lewis. Remember, it's your turn when Kai's finished. Now it's your turn. A little bit tricky. Are they the same? No. So what do we do? We turn them back over. And then it's Burton's turn. It's Burton's turn. That's right, Kai. Burton, your turn to try and find two that are the same. It is going to be a bit hard. Yeah. Are they the same, Burton? No. No. So what do we do? So we turn them back over. That's exactly right. We flip them back over. All right. Scarlett, it's your turn now. What have we got? It's our first pair. You get to keep that, Scarlett, and when you find a pair, you get another go. So would you like to have another turn? Okay. I'm just waiting for yours, aren't you? It is a bit tricky. Yeah. You've got to wait, Lewis, because whose turn is it after Scarlett? It's Kai's turn. Yeah. Off you go, Kai. Oh! What do you do now? It's a pair, and what happens when you find a pair? You keep them, and you also get another turn. So do you want to have another turn? Yeah. So let's focus on Kai first. Now, his educators have noticed that he can be highly engaged, but other times his attention seems to wander and he can show challenging behaviours when things don't go his way. And that's having implications for his learning. Now, I want you to think about what you saw in that video and how Kai engaged with the game and how he coped with disappointment, and think about the way he played that. So obviously this continued until we'd found all the pairs, but I want you to look at how Kai engaged with the game compared to Scarlett. Now, we know from the research that children who struggle with their self-regulation experience challenges with respect to both their social and academic engagement. So poor self-regulation can affect every aspect of children's lives. So we know that children who have poor self-regulation tend to experience poor school engagement, they have low academic achievement, they might experience challenges with their peers, and we also see long-term challenges in terms of their health and their wealth and their criminality. So let's think for a moment about what's going on for Kai. Now, we know Kai and Scarlett have very different needs and their abilities and interests are different too. And in order to do the best for them, we first need to understand them, and then we also need to know how to respond to them. Now, probably one of the most powerful interventions we have as educators and as researchers is to really better understand children and to respond to them individually. So the Early Years Toolbox really helps us to understand children and to respond to them. So it helps us to identify their needs and abilities, but it also allows us to know whether they're making progress or whether they're stuck. And it helps educators to structure their responses, more importantly, to children. Now, it doesn't replace educators, it supports them. So let me show you how this might work for Kai. So if we reflect back to the video we just watched on those 4 children playing the memory game, we've utilised this game within our toolbox as an assessment of children's self-regulation skills. So in the PRSIST measure, we use good old-fashioned observation of children, but it's with a twist. So we use this alongside this observation. So we have created a PRSIST formative assessment tool that really helps structure our observations, and it provides us with actionable information. So it's an approach that really benefits from capturing that kind of real world self-regulation in everyday situations. And we also detect changes, so we know what's occurring with increasing age. So if we think about the assessment, it considers children's self-regulation in relation to their cognitive regulation. So it looks at how children pay attention, whether they sustain focus on the game, do they remain engaged in the task, are they thoughtful, are they planful, are they purposeful in the cards that they select, or do they keep turning over the same cards and again? And are they directed, self-directed? So do they need to be reminded that it's their turn, or do they do that themselves? We also look at their behavioural regulation. So they follow rules? Do they follow directions? Do they resist contrary urges and impulses? And we also look at their social emotional regulation. So are they helpful? Do they take measured risks? How do they cope with disappointment? Do they recover? So we saw that Kai kind of turned away when Scarlett got the pair and realised that she actually was able to have another turn. And then we look at how long it takes for them to re-engage with the game. So what happens when we score children? On the screen here is a capture of Kai's data. So based on educators and researchers' ratings of Kai's behaviour within the memory game, we're provided with data output that tells us about Kai's strength as well as the potentialities for growth. And it also differentiates Kai's behaviour or performance in the game according to his cognitive regulation, but also his behavioural self-regulatory capacities. So what we see here is that he's above developmental expectations with respect to his cognitive self-regulation, but he needs some support with respect to his behavioural or emotional regulation. So he needs to learn how to manage disappointment. And his behaviour in the game also tells us that Kai doesn't cope with disappointment, and that might in fact impact his engagement and his ability to learn. So what this tells us is where Kai's at. But the big question is, so what? So, and this is a really valid question. Why would we assess children in early childhood? And I guess we know what happens in the early years affects what happens in school, and it affects what happens in early life. And we know the effectiveness and the relevance of these tools is really in how they inform our practice and also how they empower us to respond to the unique needs of each child and how we can support children's continued development. So when we combine this data with a wealth of knowledge and the experience that we have with children, it really gives us tools that can help identify areas of strength, but it also helps us to identify areas of opportunity. And more importantly, it really allows us to tailor our practice to the specific needs and developmental progress of children. So what we've also done is that we've put the toolbox, and for it to be meaningful, we really need to make sure that it's something that's acceptable to educators, and it needs to support their practice. So part of our implementation and our research strategy is that we've tested these tools in the hands of educators and evaluated its impact. Now, just very briefly, with respect to PRSIST, we've found that from our qualitative interviews and discussions and focus groups with educators, we've found that educators use the assessment with children, and it really shifted their lens with respect to children's capabilities and self-regulatory capacities. So sometimes educators said that they held higher expectations of children, and other times it meant that they developed a better understanding of why children behaved they did across different situations. But it also played a really important role in their approach to pedagogy and practice. So they reported, after using the toolbox, they reported being much more intentional, and they were much more differentiated in their practices according to children's needs. And in fact, they found that they were more sensitive and responsive to children as learners. So I just want to finish with in the voice of an educator in terms of the impact that it had.
I think the biggest thing I've learned is that I probably used the term self-regulation fairly broadly before, whereas now I have a much better understanding of the three different parts of self-reg, so cognitive, social, emotional and behavioural. And I think I'm much clearer in looking at children's behaviour now and going, okay, so cognitively actually they're fairly well self-regulated, but socially and emotionally not so much. So yeah, in my head I've got a better understanding of actually what self-regulation means.
So this is really just a conversation starter, but I really want to think about we're increasingly thinking about the role of assessment within early childhood. And I think the effectiveness and relevance of these tools is really how they inform our practice, and more importantly, how they empower us to respond to the unique needs of each child and how we can support their continued development. And I mean, this work is powerful and it's meaningful and it's actionable, but it doesn't replace educators. So the strength of the toolbox and the value and the innovation really sits in the hands of educators, and how educators use this data to enhance their practice and, more importantly, to support children's development.